The left is always inclined to look on the grim side of things. Always inclined to look on the grim side of things. The cup is always half empty. Until you point out, look, it's half full. It doesn't look so bad.
Welcome to Political Gingervitis, the crazy and zany podcast for progressives who need a laugh. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Andrew Stewart, and this week we're going to try to put a smile on your face and maybe a few thoughts in your head.
It's darkest before the dawn. This thought keeps me moving on. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning.
Welcome again, folks, to another exciting episode of Political Gingervitis. I'm your host, Andrew Stewart. Today, I'm going to start the show off with a segment featuring an interview with the writer and editor at Black Agenda Report, Margaret Kimberley. This interview begins on a more somber note than we usually discuss on this show because we discuss her recent column about the death of Erica Garner. At the time it was recorded, Miss Garner was still in the hospital alive, but in the time since then, she has gone on, and we wish that she will rest in power. It is not the intention of anyone to make light of or demean or insult Erica Garner's memory by talking about this on a podcast that has comedy elements to it as well as cultural and more casual lines of thought. However, the fact is we are in some very strange times that includes the perpetuation of police violence unhindered by the state against people of color and homicide of women of color such as Sandra Bland. The death of Erica Garner, who was an activist that was intent on keeping the memory of her father, Eric Garner, alive, is not something to make a joke out of, and it's not something to jest about. However, it's not despite or because, but in light of this, that left-wing and progressive people need to be able to maintain also the ability to laugh and have fun and be jovial. So again, we hope that Erica Garner shall rest in power, and at some point very soon her family will find justice in regards to the death of both Eric Garner and now his beautiful young daughter. So thank you for your time today. So Margaret, I want to start off with your newest column that you had up on your Freedom Writer page regarding the death of Erica Garner, because it was a doozy, and I think it has multiple applications to this kind of discussion. So,
well, okay, thank you. That's fine. I would like to talk about her, except it's unclear. First, we were told she was brain dead, which is death. I mean, it means that you're being kept alive with a respirator, and in fact you're dead. And I think that she suffered. They're saying some people are saying brain damage, not brain dead, but I think the damage has to have been significant at this point. So even if she's still alive, I don't see her. I don't know, but it seems to me like she's going to be in a permanent state of damage.
Right. And that compounds already the damage done by the absolute failure of any sort of justice for her father.
Yeah, her father was killed. Eric Garner was killed in 2014 on video, being choked by police, and was in a chokehold saying, "I can't breathe." The police, one officer was charged, but the grand jury did not indict. I wasn't surprised. This took place on Staten Island, by the way, which is the most conservative of all the boroughs of New York City. It's unlike the rest of the city. Mostly white ethnics. It's the place, if cops live in New York City, that's where they live, mostly Republican. A black population, but a small one. So I was not surprised that they did not indict. But likewise, the Obama Justice Department, it was among a number of cases where people were killed on video. And the Obama Justice Department declined to prosecute also. So he received no justice from anyone. The man who actually filmed the killing is the one in jail. His name is Ramsey Orta, and he was set up by the police. He did have a criminal history, but it was for something minor. And they set him up, and so now he's doing several years in prison, the one who exposed the crime. So Eric Garner's dead without justice. Now his daughter, who was struggling to keep his case before the public to make sure he was not forgotten, to try to get him justice, if she survives this heart attack, 27 years of age, the mother of two small kids, one an infant. And I saw, after I posted that, an interview she did a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about the terrible stress she was under, and how the system beats people down if they struggle for justice. She, to her credit, disrupted a town hall in 2016. Obama was there, and it's supposed to be about race, and she was invited, and it was ironically the second anniversary of her father's death, but she wasn't allowed to ask a question, and she felt she was used, and she said so, and had a brief conversation with the president, and I posted that online. You can see it on my Twitter or Facebook, and it's Obama saying, "I'm sorry for your loss, but essentially, too bad, screw you. You're not getting any justice." And with some lame explanation of why there was no federal prosecution. So, so here she is, if alive, very damaged, and who knows what sort of health care she received. So it's all the plights that Black people are under, the threat of state violence, a healthcare system that does not care for us, and this is the end result of a great injustice.
Right, and simultaneous with all this going on, I see in the social media and kind of this miasma of progressive discourse, this yearning for Obama and his administration and the Democratic Party, and it's all going to get better if we elect Democrats in 2018, and things were doing just fine until this past year,
Yeah, it's terrible. What passes for resistance? It's just pathetic. I had pointed out, I've read a lot about the Trump administration overturning Obama, administration decisions on a variety of issues. But when I looked them all up, there were always things that Obama didn't enact until 2015 or 2016. And these were clearly things that weren't that important to him. And it's very cynical. Wait till you go out the door and then throw a few progressive crumbs, and that was mostly to help Hillary Clinton get elected. And now everybody says, "Oh, it's so terrible that he that there was a decision. It wasn't even a decision. It was a recommendation from the Justice Department to look at how fines are imposed in cities like Ferguson, Missouri, which we heard about because of the police murder of Michael Brown. The mostly black population is subjected to these terrible fines for just about anything. A poor community, and then people are like in a debtor's prison. And there was this recommendation by the Justice Department to discourage that. It didn't really have any force of law, but it's something that Jeff Sessions overturned. And people are saying, "Oh, it's so terrible," but it's something that Obama didn't look at till 2016. It didn't really have the force of law. So we have this situation where, Obama proved that good manners will get you everywhere. Trump is so awful, such a buffoon, so openly racist, so stupid, so I can't think of enough adjectives to use to describe him. He's so obvious. As I was on a panel last year, and someone observed that Trump's lies are obvious and they're generally trivial. I mean, today he told some lie about the Postal Service and the Postal Service not charging enough, as if he knows how, the postal system operates. And it's a big story about his latest dumb tweet, but so what? When we look at how the Obama administration ignored the issue of police murder, which came up during their term, only 2 prosecutions of police during all that time. So we have to ask ourselves, what really is worse, and what was so much better about Obama? And it was all smoke and mirrors. It's appearance. It's destroying the nation of Libya. In the news of late, we've been hearing again, and it's not really news, after Obama and his Secretary of State Hillary Clinton destroyed Libya, had the president murdered. She bragged about it, in fact, and laughed about it. Among other things, migrants from other African countries began using Libya as a route to try to get to Europe. And they're subjected to horrible treatment. Some of them are literally being enslaved. The jihadists who overthrew Gaddafi carried out massacres of darker-skinned Libyans or African migrants. And that is Obama's doing. But people who write about, I find it interesting, write about this story and not mention his name, not talk about Syria. The war in Syria is almost over. The Russians backed up Assad, so the country has been taken back from ISIS, but that also happened because of Obama. Now ISIS, they're just moving it from country to country. Now they're all in Afghanistan, and they're going to destroy that again, I guess. So these are the things that happened under Obama. People should criticize this tax bill. It is terrible that it gives even more money to the wealthiest people. But Obama is the one who bailed out the banks and did not bail out homeowners. And black people lost what little wealth black people have is in property ownership. So the black community was devastated during that time, but we don't hear about that now. So we just have a yearning for a nicer man with better language, who's more articulate. And instead of this man who's obviously so awful. And I'm not sure what people resist. What are people resisting nowadays? If Trump fires Robert Mueller, people said they're going to take to the streets about the FBI, of all things. So that's where we are right now. And it's pretty disheartening. But I have hope. I always have hope, even as I complain.
Right. And, I've had conversations, and I've also seen Jean Urraca talking about how he feels that the Green Party really could be at the forefront leading genuine kind of resistance against things like tax or healthcare or immigration or any number of things that the Democrats do these kind of milquetoast fake resistance moves in the media for, but it finds itself instead compromised by what are really just some superficial squabbles. And I was wondering what your thoughts or feelings were, because you have a different perspective as somebody who's in New York and they have a much more substantial Green Party.
Well, the Green Party, I am registered as a Green, and I voted for Jill Stein and John Mubaraka, and I'm proud that I did, and I defend that vote. There has to be, the Democratic Party, in my opinion, has destroyed itself. Hillary Clinton's defeat was the last nail in the coffin. The Democrats had lost the majority of state legislatures, lost both houses of Congress. So this was the day of reckoning. There's no reason to prop up the Democrats. We have to do something different. They must be replaced. We must have a party that speaks for workers' rights, that speaks for peace around the world. This time of the sixth great extinction, that speaks to our need to reverse the damage done to the planet, which puts life itself at risk, and that's no exaggeration. So I think the Green Party is the best alternative, and it has its difficulties, of course. The system is very hostile to third parties, and we've seen these continued attacks on the Greens by the Democrats, by the corporate media. Hillary Clinton's defeat was all the fault of the Green Party, and people look at the votes in those three Midwestern states that flipped from Democrat to Republican and blame the Greens instead of at 70-some-odd thousand votes. That's definitely an outreach failure on the part of the Democrats, and among Hillary Clinton's other many failings, but and Democrats are loath to criticize this woman who failed so spectacularly and defend her tenaciously. But that's a sign of a party that needs to die off. And the argument I make to people is, I don't know why you're propping up a party that fails. But it's going to be a hard nut to crack. The attacks in the media, the fact that people who did dare to use their votes for the Greens instead of the Democrats have been vilified, and that has an impact on people personally. So I think it's difficult, but I think it's worthwhile, and I think we have to keep pointing out how little we get from the Democrats. It's, the most we can do is try to keep the worst, most racist, most reactionary people out of office. But even then, the benefits are negligible. And it's time to, and I acknowledge that, but because Trump did unleash what had been kept closeted and hidden, this overt racism, the open white supremacy. But I always say that's something we suffered under before. The mass incarceration, police murder, blatant discrimination. I could go on and on and on. And to say that we should go back to a time when the alt-right stayed hidden is not much of an achievement. This is a desperate times call for desperate measures, and we must dump the Democrats for good because they have killed themselves off, frankly.
Right. So one of the internal issues that continues to surface, and I think this is actually more of a long-term identity issue in the Green Party, is the difference between what we could call left liberals and then more socialist inclined people of all various tendencies, because we've got a very wide spectrum that spans back to the New Left and that period where you had a very wide number of tendencies. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that kind of struggle and negotiating through those kinds of challenges, because we've seen a lot of young people who have come into politics for the first time ever as a result of this election, and some of them are saying, I've given up. I'm not able to handle trying to fight this fight with this organization. I'm going to try to go find somewhere else, or try to work within something like Democratic Socialists of America or Progressive
Mhm.
Democrats. And DSA, I'm ready to point out the critique that exists of their founding membership, but they've done a huge mushrooming in the past year because of the Sanders campaign. And it seems they've got interesting identity challenges going on within themselves, from what I gather.
Yeah, it's the leftist liberals, the leftist Democrats are frankly a problem. During the Sanders campaign, there were people who left the Green Party to register as Democrats, especially in states like here in New York, where I am, where you cannot vote in a party's primary without being a member of that party. So there are people who gave up their Green Party registration in order to be Democrats. And I sort of understood it, but Bernie Sanders it's a funny thing. You can tell how far politics has moved to the right. Bernie Sanders is just an old school Democrat. All Democrats sounded like him 40 years ago. So, he's an old, trying to bring back or keep what's left of the New Deal and things that Democrats like Bill Clinton got rid of. On foreign policy, it was more of an afterthought with him, but when he finally started expressing himself, it's pretty much the same as other Democrats. We have to keep Putin in check, and he would say things like we have to respect the Palestinians, but no real change in the relationship vis-a-vis Israel, saying the late Hugo Chavez was just a communist dictator. And so being ready to use war by other means against countries like Venezuela. So foreign policy, I think he's awash. Domestic policy, there's some mild reform. To talk about free college, the possibility of free college, that's something like that's very important. To wipe out student debt is very important. But there were, but I see that as being reformist. And but that was too much for the Democrats, so they had to crush him and keep vilifying him. And then, when they're not blaming the Green Party for Hillary Clinton's loss, they're blaming Bernie Sanders for all their woes. But back to, I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit. I think those people who left the Green Party so they could vote for Bernie Sanders, it was disheartening to me because the Green Party is supposed to be a definite turn away from the two capitalist parties. Greens don't call themselves a socialist party, although many, as you point out, people who are socialists are Green members. But I think this idea that there's a better Democrat on the horizon, so let's go back to the Democrats, is a failure. The Democrats are a corporate party. They're bought off by people with money. That's why they failed. They cannot propose the simplest reform, Medicare for all, or free college, or anything, the most minimal things they can't do because they're in the pocket of big business and wealthy donors. So I'm disappointed, but I hope people learn a lesson from that. And it's a funny thing about Trump, the Trump presidency. You can learn the wrong lesson. So, there are lots of things that people say you can learn from Trump. One is you must stick with the Democrats. I think that's incorrect. One is we can't ever complain about the Democrats, and I when the Democrats get back in office, and then eventually that will happen, they'll, the Republicans will mess up enough for them to have a presidential victory. The lesson, unfortunately, people are already saying it. You can't complain about the Democrats at all, and we have to take whatever crumbs they give us, and because the Republicans are so much worse.
And it strikes me a lot of these newcomers into politics and people who have just gotten interested in the electoral process because of this crazy election, there is a substantial dearth of political education on everything. I mean, you just briefly alluded to it. A lot of people now think that the New Deal and that model of Sanders thinking is socialism, or
Right.
uh, you have people who are kind of falling into a mindset around maybe DSA and its kind of anti-communist brand of politics in some regards. Jacobin, for example, is a very popular magazine, and I see it as a very kind of radical chic publication for the campus armchair revolutionaries. So I was wondering what you think political education needs to look like going forward.
Well, I think we can baby steps perhaps. I think we can talk about the election and talk about what it does and doesn't mean, and try to stop this runaway train back towards the Democratic Party and all of their failures, all of their betrayals to their not giving us even a tiny bit of what we want, just saying we're not Republicans and expecting people to keep supporting them, and then they fail even at that and expect support. So I think we can start there and start asking, why keep supporting these people who stab you in the back, who then aren't even competent enough to win? Why can't we look at something different? Why can't we look at the rest of the world? Look at what socialism means. Look at countries that have Sanders often made reference to Scandinavian countries, which have a healthy safety net. They still belong to NATO. They're still militaristic, but they have a healthy safety net of living minimum wage is a living wage, and the things of that nature. I suppose it is socialistic, but true socialism is the people owning the means of production. It's a loss of private property and the getting away from the rule of corporations. That would be real socialism. And I think political education, it could be as basic as, well, why do you think our system is so wonderful? I mean, when you think and people think this because things are just not mentioned. For example, it was revealed a couple of years ago that the median income in this country is something like $31,000, and most people can't survive a financial emergency of more than $1,000. Essentially, Americans are poor. Wages have stagnated. The minimum wage is not a living wage. I mean, that's an understatement. And but still, we're told this is the best of all possible worlds. This is the best system. But for people to look at their plight, people who go bankrupt because they get sick, who literally have no money, despite the fact that they work, and ask ourselves, well, what are you defending? Why are you defending a system like this? It's getting worse and worse and worse. The fact that there are fewer and fewer living wage jobs. Now we have technology, which is disappearing jobs, and there's no talk in this country of providing people with a basic income. So if the self-driving trucks eliminate truck driver jobs, that people can still survive. So I think we can just start there and just ask people, why do you think this is so wonderful? To be told over and over again, we have the best healthcare system in the world. We don't. Not by any measure. We don't. We rank like 30th in the world. Life expectancy is way, way below what people think it is. It's an overly expensive system because it's beholden to private interest, big pharma and private insurance companies, corporate insurance companies. So just point out to people what they have, for what they really have, as opposed to what they think they have, to talk about possibilities in the rest of the world, or just to talk about what happens in this country. So Bernie Sanders says, we can talk about having free college. And what's the first thing people say? Where's that money going to come from? Well, all of a sudden, Trump becomes president and says he wants a 10% increase in the military budget and gets it. And the Democrats go along with him and add to what he proposed. So all that talk of where's the money going to come from disappears if it's for the military. I think very simple things like that before we, get to deeper political education and talk about real socialism and talk about Marx and talk about what was accomplished in many countries around the world. So I think we can just keep it simple. Mm-hmm. Really, and just be honest about how our country really works, what our country really does. The fact that studies have shown we don't have a democracy anymore. We do not get, even when we participate and vote, and that's the only thing we're encouraged to do is vote, we don't get what we want. All of the things that Americans want are declared off limits.
Right.
So I think if we start with the basics, I think that's a good way to begin that exercise.
Right. Now, one I've run into in my time also organizers and activists who are very emphatic that part of it needs to embrace a kind of intersectionality and be. Ajamu, I saw him say this in a speech, that we currently have this discourse pitting the idea of identity politics against class politics, when in fact it should be intersectionality, which binds the two together and breaks that kind of logjam. And in that sense, we're seeing a growth in black politics in America. And it seems to have on one pole this Afro-pessimism of Ta-Nehisi Coates, and on the other side you've got what Cedric J. Robinson calls the black radical tradition, and includes the thinkers such as Cornel West, C.L.R. James, Richard Wright. Where do you think political education in that sense should begin?
Well, I think we need to be reminded of black people in particular, what we have accomplished for ourselves and for the rest of the country. Black people gained the right to vote in the 60s when most of us lived in the South and didn't have the right to vote. We have to rekindle that mass movement, which was bought off. There were, the system always protects itself, so they make sure that black people can get elected to office, or some jobs can be open for black people, that some group will do a little better than the rest of the group. The whole group does a little bit better than they did before. And so now you have the result of that is what we call a Black Agenda Report, the Black Misleadership class, who depend upon this system and make sure that the rest of us are quiet. Obama's rise is the direct result of that. The absence of black political, black politics is it should be more than black people being in office. It should amount to more than having black politicians. I don't know what kind of black politics we have when the Congressional Black Caucus joins with Republicans in increasing the military budget. But that's where we are. And so it's a steep hill to climb to point out to people, this is what we did. I'm glad I'm the age I am. I'm 58. And even though I was a kid during most of it, that I remember there was a time when black people did not have to be encouraged to be radical. We just were. We were always the most radical sector of society because we were the ones who suffered the most. To remember how people joined the Black Panther Party and that it was crushed for that reason, that we were the ones who took to the streets. We were the ones who made the demands. the Congressional Black Caucus used to be called the conscience of the Congress until they were bought off like everybody else. So I think we can just remind people what we did for the whole country. The civil rights movement was the parent of every other social movement that came afterwards. The environmentalism and feminism and other ethnic groups, all of these various, if you want to talk about identity politics, identities, everyone profited from what Black people did. And for us to now say the best we can do is to keep Roy Moore from winning in Alabama and have a conservative Democrat instead, to think that that's our biggest victory, well, it's very slim pickings, as the saying goes. So we need to have true Black politics and talk about what that means, so that we don't think having a Black politician, a Black face in a high place is a victory in and of itself. And sometimes it's a sign of defeat. I believe Obama's presidency was a sign of defeat for us.
Interesting.
I think so.
Yeah. What is your own personal reaction or feeling to this Afro-pessimism that Coates has been the most vocal or prominent person to express in his writing?
Well, it's just like a cop-out to me. It's he's a good writer, but basically he just laments. He laments our condition. He dissects it. He talks about white supremacy and what it's done to us, and says this is why we. Talks about reparations and says we should have it. But other than that, just to say things are bad, we don't need a writer to tell us that things are bad. We're living that, all of us, all the time. So you can describe and analyze the situation, but then there has to be some action. But just to be pessimistic is a waste. And it lets the system off the hook. And it encourages people to give up. It encourages people to act against our interests. Coates, I think, is an example of that. Someone told me, and I looked it up for myself, it's true. After the verdict in Florida, which acquitted George Zimmerman of murder in the case of Trayvon Martin, Coates said that the jury got it right. And he had some legalistic explanation. And, for a Black person with his talents and his insights, to say that was just dreadful. And so it tells me where he's coming from. So that's beyond pessimism. At a certain point, then you switch sides, in my opinion, and you're an enemy. So, and I know those are strong words, but I stand by it. For any Black person to do anything other than condemn that verdict is a disgrace. But I'm glad he did it, because I feel like I know where he really stands now. So I don't have to get caught up in any debates about Coates. He has condemned himself with his own words. So to have talented people just say things are bad and that's all is of no use whatsoever to the rest of us.
Okay. Now, it seems from where we stand in this political landscape, there's a lot of similarities between today and where Eugene V. Debs and the Socialist Party was operating from back at the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. And one thing I've discovered in my reading is that they had a very problematic way of handling race and racism. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in his application letter to the Communist Party in the later part of his life that he, in fact, had to call them out for participating in segregation. And Debs said in speeches that he was opposed to lynching, but he also said that the issue of race needed to be subsumed into the class issue, and then by contrast, you had the Communist Party come around in the next 20 years and address black politics and the black national question, as they called it, as something that should be given a certain amount of respect and address that didn't put it on the periphery. And I was wondering what you think about that sort of dynamic, because that seems kind of where we're at in some ways today, too.
Yeah, well, that's historic. You're reminding me of Frederick Douglass, who was a champion for decades of women's rights and he went to the Seneca Falls Convention, where it was the issue first came to national attention. And what did he get for all of that? When they had a conference in the southern state, they told him not to show up. And white suffragists using a racist argument, well, if black men get to vote, white women should be able to vote. So this is historic, either being told that our issue is secondary to someone else's, or being victimized by people who are supposed to be comrades and allies. So this is not new. But one of the reasons I am agreeing, their platform says quite clearly that we must talk about the process of having reparations and how that should come about. We cannot have we can't be part of any movements. We've seen this movie. We know how it ends, where we're told to take a back seat for the greater good of somebody who doesn't care about us. And I think that's what where the intersectionality has to come in. This term identity politics is curious. We've always had it. We've always had identity politics. People vote based on ethnicity, on what part of the country they live in, their religious beliefs. So all politics is a kind of identity politics, in my opinion. But I think the times call for integrating all of these issues, and but black people cannot we can't allow ourselves to go through what we've been through in the past, and we have to make it clear that that's what this term ally and white ally means. You have to really, I think, just really being on the left makes someone an ally, truly. And but that means black people have to, speaking of political education, have to learn what it really means to be on the left. And we have to be unafraid to jettison all the things that haven't worked for us, that, in this society where, we have two parties, one is far right, one center right, and this center right party is considered left. Which is just a joke. It's bizarre. So we have to educate ourselves about what that means and about what we used to say. In the 60s, there was a welfare rights movement. It was huge. They said without hesitation, without shame, that people on public assistance had rights. And they fought for a court case, which in the late 60s, there was a Supreme Court case which declared that it was unconstitutional. Until this court case of families with dependent children, the father could not be in the home. So the only way for kids to get help was for their father to be absent. And it's because people mobilized. A man named, I think his name was George Wiley, who was a PhD chemist, but I'm not sure how he got involved in the welfare rights movement. But we went from there to voting for Bill Clinton, who got rid of the right to public assistance. And I think we have to learn and know and be reminded about what we did, and not accept that the best we can do is have a Democrat stab us in the back instead of a Republican. So I think black people are key, really, to the issue of political education for everybody. Frankly, we have to start with ourselves and know what we have done, and let that be a way of directing us to what we can do again, and step up and take that role. But what that means is we are going to have to reject this black misleadership class, because they are the greatest danger. They are the ones who have done us in. And we can't be afraid to get rid of them either and condemn them in the terms they should be condemned.
Right. Are there any other points in closing you wanted to bring up?
I wanted so many things going on in the world, aren't there? But I'd like to talk a little about this Russiagate phenomenon,
Right.
Which is being used. It covers. It kills many birds with one stone. The charge that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians to help him get elected. It covers up the Democrats' failures. It makes the case for the American, constant, ever-present American effort to control the rest of the world. And now it's being used to shut people up and to attack the left. We were told that the Russians spent $50,000 on the troll farm, and people sent messages on Facebook which caused people to vote for Donald Trump. All over Eastern Europe, not just Russia, there are people who use clickbait scheme to get people to look at their ads, and that's pretty much all it amounts to. And I'm reminded through this that you can make anything look sinister. And Trump is so horrible, it's easy to believe the worst thing possible about him. But what have we seen so far? His former aide, Paul Manafort, is a crook. He's been indicted for being a crook. Flynn lied to the FBI because he lied about speaking to the Russian ambassador, but he spoke to the Russian ambassador because Israel asked him to. So when you look at the facts, every day there's a new story. The Russians were cultivating Trump for years, but he never, ever consummated a business deal in Russia. He wanted to build a hotel in Moscow and failed.
Right.
He was trying to do it since the days of the Soviet Union. So I'm like, well, what kind of cultivation is that, where you don't let the guy do what he wants to do? So, and he's made contacts with some wannabe oligarchs. But in the days when the oligarchs were untamed, before Putin came to power, Democrats liked them just fine. And Bill Clinton meddled in the Russian election in 1996 to make sure Boris Yeltsin won again instead of the Communist Party, who people look like they might elect. So now we have this censorship on social media. Google changes its algorithms. And even Democratic Party, not even really left-wing websites, you can't find them on Google, doesn't direct you there anymore. I've had trouble finding things I wrote. I know the title. I know I wrote it. I know it's in Black Agenda Report, but Google won't take me there anymore.
Right.
People being silenced, people who were experts on Russia. They used to be on TV for decades, and now they've been disappeared unless they parrot the talking points of anti-Russia talking points. They are disappeared. So this is very, very dangerous. And the real issue with Russia is that the Russians have gone their own way. They've stopped trying to placate the United States. After the destruction of Libya, the attempt to destroy Syria, the American-backed coup in Ukraine, they are turning to the east. They're turning to China. Russia and China are trying to get rid of the petrodollar as a world reserve currency, and that's what really scares them. But they're not going to tell the rubes what their real issue is with Russia. They're just going to repeat over and over again that Vladimir Putin is evil and is in league with Donald Trump. So this is very, very dangerous. And the effort now is being led by Democrats who now love the FBI and use terms like the intelligence community. We always talked about intelligence agencies. Now all of a sudden they're a community, making them seem warm and fuzzy. And people defend Comey and Mueller, people who are our enemies, and that's strong language, but I stand by that too. So that is the thing that I'm keeping an eye on. There's always other stuff going on in the world, and the other thing that concerns me, the big danger from the United States comes from Israel and Saudi Arabia. They are the countries leading Trump around by the nose, and they have the potential to create war.
Right.
And that's very dangerous.
Right. And one of the things that I've been mulling over as a possible convergence is this fake news thing might have been in combination with the net neutrality development as a way to tape down on dissent as a
Sure.
coordinated
Well, net
effort.
neutrality. I mean, talk about something else. It's now they the internet companies, the cable companies, can do what they like. They can have a fast lane and a slow lane. They can restrict access to certain sites. They can make you pay more if you want to have full services, and along with the censorship issues I just mentioned, are very dangerous because the internet leveled the playing field a little bit, and that everybody had access to everything. That's why they're always in, Obama won't shut up about fake news, and he's worried about social media. He's worried about people finding out the things that he did as president.
Right.
And the things that he's still trying to do. All these ex-presidents, they have the same job forever and ever, it seems, where they try to get rich themselves and help their rich supporters get richer and back imperialism. So that's what he's prattling on and on about.
Dr. Tony Monteiro is a professor based out of Philadelphia and an expert on the life and works of W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century. This year, he and his comrades are holding an event called Philadelphia Read Du Bois. The year of Du Bois will begin with a celebration of his vision of the unity of Pan-Africa and Pan-Asia against colonial oppression and for the building of a better world. The event will begin with a symposium that is being held on February 23rd and 24th, 2018, at the Church of the Advocate in Philadelphia, which he invites students and all who are interested from across the country to come and join in. I spoke with Dr. Monteiro from Philadelphia. Dr. Monteiro, I want to start off by asking, just in a general sense, who W.E.B. Du Bois is and what his book Darkwater is when it is published.
Yeah, well, W.E.B. Du Bois is one of those great thinkers that emerged out of the struggle for Black freedom. He was a sociologist, a philosopher, a novelist, a musicologist, and above all, he was a person that combined knowledge and social science with the practical life experiences of ordinary people, especially Black people. And he tied knowledge to the civil rights and Pan-Africanist struggles. So he was that kind of figure. Now, the book Darkwater is a very unique book, even for our time, in that it combines literature, poetry, fiction, and political science and sociological investigations, all in one book, attempting to illuminate what the race problem in the United States and the colonial problem in Africa was at the time of the publication of the book, which was in 1920.
So one of the things that seems very clear as a theme that he's working with is the idea that would later come to materialize in the slogan "Black is Beautiful," and the idea of opposition to anti-Black racism. And I was wondering if you could touch on that.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you raised. And you know, he is indeed putting forward a form of what we would today call Black is Beautiful, but he links Blackness or the origins of Blackness to Africa and to African civilizations. And he also says that Black folk in the United States are a derivative of African civilization, and on the other hand, are a civilization in their own right. So he's addressing the problem of race in a way that is quite different from what many of us are accustomed to today. He's not talking about assimilating black people into American culture, but liberating black culture from the oppression of American culture. So it's very interesting in that respect. And I think, if we look at the short story, The Comet, which was very well known at the time of the publication of the book Darkwater, he's combining satire with allegory. In other words, an allegory is a way in a short story or in a novel of using a situation that is not actual to talk about and clarify actual situations. So, in The Comet, a comet like Halley's Comet hits New York. And most people in New York, or practically everybody in New York, is killed except for two people, a black man and a white woman. And he takes it from there. What happens if all of the people in this big metropolis are killed and these two people are left to start all over again?
Right. Now, how did Du Bois feel about populations from what we would call the African diaspora, like, say, Dominican Republic or Haiti or other parts of Latin America, who had African origins also, but were coming into America by way of these Spanish-speaking countries?
Or French-speaking countries.
Right.
Because, Du Bois's father was Haitian from the Caribbean island of Haiti. And so he, you might say, was bicultural. He was both African-American or Black American and Haitian. And he felt that the Africans, or those of the African diaspora, let us say in the Caribbean or in South or Central America, coming into the United States would meld into the black population here, in spite of the fact that they came speaking Spanish or French or Portuguese, and in spite of the fact that they had certain cultural patterns that were different from African Americans. Being from Africa, they would have more in common with one another, especially as they faced racism and white supremacy, than they would have in common with the white American mainstream. So he looked positively upon the Caribbean and South and Central American immigrants, although he was not naive, so he understood that there were differences, and often those differences could produce problems.
Okay. One of the essays in Darkwater that I think is a very interesting kind of moment that Du Bois echoes with the ending of The Comet is the Damnation of Women essay, where he talks about the degradation of women of color. And I think at the end of The Comet, there's this moment where you see the melting away and obliteration of racism, at least beginning to take place in what they're discussing. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, that's interesting that you put those two together. That's an interesting kind of uniting of two different themes or ideas. The damnation of women is like a feminist text, but it's a feminist text, a black feminist text, in that it looks at the special problems of black women. Not only are they the same as women in general, but they are intensified and made more difficult because of racism and the color line. And in fact, he argues in The Damnation of Women that that the African woman is the mother of modern humanity, and that he talks about this idea that he called the African mother idea, the idea that the African woman is at the foundation of human civilization itself. Now, in the Comet, he's dealing with a modern situation in a kind of allegorical sense, a fictional sense, where a comet hits the Earth, and New York is decimated, its population, and a black man and a white woman are left to rethink the future. But that rethinking of the future, and that is to rethink a future without racism and white supremacy, where the two races would begin anew in equality. But that, at the end, is defeated because, unbeknownst to the two people who are alive in New York, there are other white people, especially white men, who were in other parts of the country, who come and find these two people and say to the white woman, "Now you are safe. We have saved you." And in fact, they imply that they have saved her from this black man. And the rich white man says, "Here's a few dollars," gives a few dollars to the black man. And the poor white people say, "We will lynch this black man because we suspect him of having sex with our white woman." And so it ends that way. It ends literally where it began, in a white supremacist New York, in a white supremacist social system.
Right. And it's kind of like two opposites between the first Damnation of Women essay and this ending moment, because the salvation of the woman has come through the African man and what he is able to offer in terms of being someone willing to stand in solidarity with her, and that is thrown asunder in the name of white supremacy.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And in The Damnation of Women, what he says is that women are emancipated through work and education. As long as women are locked in to patriarchal marriages and are confined to the home or the household, and are denied are given only second-class jobs and second-class education, they can no longer be free. A woman, according to Du Bois, must have the right to choose marriage or not to be married, and must have the opportunity for full education and an equal education, and the right to make a salary that is equal to what any man would do, and the right to hold jobs and occupations that any man would hold. Now, in The Damnation of Women, Du Bois is thinking first and foremost about the working class and poor woman. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
As he is in the Comet, because, this kind of joining of this black man with this white woman in a unity to create or build a new future. The black man is a working class man, and the white woman is a more upper class, rich woman.
Right. Now, you and your comrades and colleagues down in Philadelphia are having a 150th anniversary recognition of Du Bois and his birth with your Saturday Free School movement. I was wondering if you could just discuss some of the things that are coming up with that.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just direct you to our website, yearofdubois, one word, .org, and you get a lot of information there. But, this year, 2018, is the 150th anniversary of W.E.B. Du Bois's birth. And here in Philadelphia, we're trying to mobilize and engage the entire city, schools, unions, churches, colleges, community organizations, left organizations, in a year of symposiums, cultural celebrations, panels, and a year-long effort called Philadelphia Reads Du Bois, where throughout the city, on the second and fourth Sunday of each month, people will gather to read various of the works of W.E.B. Du Bois, and this will go on for an entire year. Also, we're going to have pop-ups throughout the city where we will pop up, people will pop up in different places, like at transit stops, at colleges, and read from various books and essays of W.E.B. Du Bois. And on one of the radio stations here, which is the Black-owned talk radio show, we will have every week readings and interpretations and discussions of various of the works of W.E.B. Du Bois. So we want to immerse the entire city in this project of reading Du Bois. It's kind of a literacy campaign where people who can't read will feel as comfortable as people who can in this project of reading Du Bois. You don't have to know how to read Du Bois. Most of it will be reading aloud. And I guess the last thing is that we have presented a resolution to the City Council to declare 2018 in the whole city the year of Du Bois.
Thanks for tuning in, folks, and we're going to hope to hear from you next time.